Hey, Fiends of the Pod, Nate Wyckoff, your host here again, reminding you like, subscribe, and yes, it is hard to come up with these extra little special things for every episode. But like my good friend behind me, Godzilla, I will not stop until every single building in a metropolitan area is destroyed if you don't like and subscribe. Enjoy, and please go to cultandclassicfilms.com to pick up exclusive cult movies, and also you can subscribe and have them delivered at a discount to your door every single month. Enjoy the show.
Welcome to Cult and Classic.
All right, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us on this first episode of Cult and Classic, the genre film podcast where we talk about mainstream on the edge films as well as cult films that I guarantee you have not heard of or seen. With you, as always, is your host, Nate Wyckoff, comedian and film reviewer for horrornews.net. I also have my good friend, Tad Mastroianni. Say hello, Tad.
Howdy.
And Jeffrey Tucker.
How's it going? Never exercised with a shark.
That is, you know what? We're going to go into that because that is absolutely true. This podcast is dedicated to comparing movies on the edge of mainstream with their cult counterparts that have a thematic link. So this first episode, we are going to be discussing William Peter Blatty's The Exorcist III and Donald Farmer's 2015 film, Shark Exorcist. All right, so up first, we're going to talk about The Exorcist III. Now, The Exorcist III has a lot of interesting backstory and troubled history. It is, of course, the third film in the famous Exorcist franchise. I mean, The Exorcist is the most well-known horror film worldwide of all time and has its own interesting backstory. Just a quick plot summary. The Exorcist III follows some characters that were in the first Exorcist film, but really it's its own story about a cop, Kinderman, who is looking for the killer or killers of people who seem to be doing a more than copycat job of murdering people in the style of the Gemini killer, who has been dead for over a decade, I believe. So let's get started. Tad, what did you think of this film?
I honestly felt that it was one of those movies where it probably could have been a brilliant classic were it not for a couple problems. Last night, I finished it last night, and I honestly, I thought it was brilliant. It was actually like really gripping me, and then the last 20 minutes, it shit itself. It literally shit itself.
What do you think, Jeff?
I think there were some very good scenes. Some that really stood out to me as enjoyable being the main character's kind of nemesis carp. I enjoyed the gravitas of him having a monologue of how this carp was the bane of his existence.
Yes, that his mother-in-law is staying with them, and she cooks a carp, but because they have toxins, she makes it swim around in their bathtub for several days, and he can't stand the splashing, so he doesn't want to go home until it's asleep. Which it's the sort of thing that, to me, it really shows William Peter Blatty's his novelist skill, because that's not the kind of backstory that I think a typical screenwriter who's really used to getting into the point very directly, and this is a generalization, but it's the kind of detail that, you know, you would expect from a novel and is harder to pull off in a film, but I think that they work really well. Especially, I mean, George C. Scott, who plays Kinderman, he is one of my favorites of all time. He died in 1999 out here in California, but until then, I mean, every role, I watched this movie and I was like, oh, no one else could play this character. Like, to me, and I guess the story is that he and William Peter Blatty didn't actually get along. They had problems with each other on set, but they both had the professional skills to be like, okay, we're putting this to the side. We got to film it. We got to do it. Let's go. What did you think about the ending, Jeff?
So overall, as a film, it's not my sort of thing. Specifically for the ending, I don't like that type of ending. It's actually kind of a trope that's used a lot in, movies and television, where you have a character who's kind of almost has like an internal battle. it's not cinematic, so I don't understand why it's become like such a commonplace thing. And so you have this kind of internal battle that's not really shown except through like, you know, constipated, you know, kind of moments. Right. So, you know, that stuff falls short for me. And so, yeah, so as in terms of a conclusion, I didn't feel like there was
and
one.
I think what you're talking about, sorry.
Yeah, nothing kind of came through fruition that happened earlier on that connects to the end of the film. So there's kind of a disconnect there for me.
So some people listening may know this story, but you're both, I think, really hitting on the core, which is this movie was not supposed to have an exorcism in it. And the climax of the film is the exorcism. So, and guys, this is a film review and critique, so there will be spoilers. So go out and watch these movies. I guarantee you, any movie we talk about is going to be interesting to watch, whether you know what happens or not, okay? Because listening to me talk is not the same as watching it. But the ultimate killer turns out to be this serial killer that his friends, you presume demons, have implanted in the body of a priest that everyone thought was dead from the first Exorcist film. And so Kinderman ends up realizing this, and he sort of is unwilling to believe the spiritual nature of this until he experiences it by running into this priest who used to be his friend in a mental asylum and learning that the serial killer is using his body and sort of body jumping. And I think it's interesting, Jeff, because you said this wasn't your kind of thing. And I wonder if it's the religious overtones, because you like Fallen a lot, and Fallen lifted this plot.
Yeah, so I think so if I were to break down the difference between this film and Fallen, Fallen uses a lot of exposition in its film to describe the demon's limitations in the physical realm, right? So it allowed for this really kind of cat and mouse sort of battle of the wits between the main character and this demon, and it really the way that unfolded, you know, like there were hints and little like kind of beautiful notes that were put throughout that film that then came to kind of fruition at the end, including one of my favorite uses of foreshadowing in any film, actually. So, you know, I you know, right in the very first line of that film, they slam a huge bit of foreshadowing that's really nice. That really closes out that film for me. I think that's it for me. It's a really this film Exorcist is very spiritual, and like what happens is to me not shown, and they don't kind of get into the limitations of what this demon's powers are, whereas the Fallen kind of does that and does it in a nice way.
And that's interesting, because I think your background as an engineer is pointing that too. You like to see the working and building.
Exactly.
So what I think a big chunk of problem is, because I absolutely agree with you, Tad, that the last 20 minutes, it's kind of like, oh shit, we forgot to end this movie. And then they end it. And Jeff, you're like, it's not, it seems almost unfocused, because it ends in a way that's sort of not satisfactory to this core idea of battling identities in a body, as well as an opposing outside and inside good evil force. And what actually happened with this film is William Peter Blatty directed and wrote this film. He also wrote the original novel for The Exorcist and the script. So he's the man who did it. And what happened is Exorcist II came out in the 80s, and it is the pinnacle of bizarre 80s choices as far as sequels. The first Exorcist, of course, being very based in religious Christianity, and tropes are abound in it. And Exorcist II decides to be all 80s about it and say, hey, what if the demon is actually still in little Reagan in her dreams? And we're going to develop a machine and psychiatrists who use dream machines, and causes a bunch of chaos. It's terrible. William Peter Blatty hated it. Critics hated it. And so William Peter Blatty actually had written a sequel novel called Legion, which, if anybody's interested in poetic novels with horror overtones, although I'm not sure I'd call it a horror novel, it's brilliant. If you want to see how it's done, Dan Brown, read Legion. Okay, that was actually the issue with this film. Is the producing company saw what he did because he followed his novel in which there is no exorcism, hence why it's called Legion and not The Exorcist Legion or something like that, and were terrified. They were horrified that there was no exorcist, that there was very little supernatural element was implied, which in my opinion works to the betterment of the film, because it's all about the question of how much power is really given to this entity, or whatever the case may be, or is there really an entity, that sort of thing. So they had a film cut that was done that's actually shorter than this film, which I think runs a little long. I think this film was overlong, and they made him reshoot the entire final third of the film. They added characters. Tad, you mentioned that there's some stuff that seems like it didn't fit. Totally. The father at the end who gets peeled off the ceiling, there's the one effect of gruesome FX, which it's a good effect. You know, his skin is flayed and all sorts of stuff. Doesn't even belong in the film.
He
The
looks
Exorcist,
like obliterated, and then suddenly he's back, and I'm like,
back.
oh my God.
That's the trope I hate, right?
Oh,
the guy has just the power to reach for the gun, or, you know, in this case, the cross. And it's such a clusterfuck. And, and I think to everyone's credit, I think they still pulled off an okay ending that is completely standard and overused. I mean, there is, at least if you're going to do it, at least have some special effects, and they did. Apparently, according to IMDb, some people, there's $4 million worth of Exorcist footage in there in that final scene. I do not believe that for a second. I think that maybe $4 million for the entire reshoots. But I think what I love about this film, which coincidentally was Jeffrey Dahmer's favorite film. That's an interesting one. Yeah. So interestingly enough, the acting, like I said, is phenomenal. And the characterization is over the top. The first half of the film solidly is all characterization, right? Between these characters, they talk. Kinderman talks. Sometimes he's like he's talking to himself in sort of completely not on topic, but then it is on topic, and it's sort of it's a little bit foreshadowing, a little bit complete batshit nut stuff, and the rest of the cast is aware of it. They treat him as though he's talking to himself sometimes until he yells at them to do something. And I've got a clip here I want to play of one of my favorite scenes early on. This is after a 12-year-old, I believe he's 12-year-old black boy is found murdered gruesomely in a ritual style killing, I think you'd say, by a river. And it turns out that Kinderman knew him from a police student program. There we go.
I tell Ryan that we have nothing to go on in this case. You know what he says to me? Win some, lose some. You're a racist, Ryan. Did you know that? On the entrance exam for new policemen, they ask, what are rabies and what would you do for them? Ryan said, rabies are Jewish priests, and I would do anything I possibly could for them.
I love that. I love that bit, because it's like there is humor in this, even though they're talking about a murder case, and it tells you so much about Kinderman's character right off the bat. Like, it's how you do exposition, right? Like, take that Phantom Menace. It's like you've got a cop who's world weary. He knows terrible things happen. He's tired of it, but he's still kind and cares and wants to do his job. And he's reaming out another officer who's flippant about it. And we all would probably be flippant about it if we deal with it all the time, right? But he's like, no, you can't be flippant about it. It's still got to be important. And I think, were there any characters, like Tad, did you think anything was weak? Any characters were weak? Or there were, aside from the shoved in, shoehorned in priest at the end?
Actually, yeah. The fact that I found it interesting how they kind of shoehorned his family in. Like, they were kind of in there for some bit jokes, which some of them landed for me. I thought they were kind of interesting. But overall, I felt like that family was literally there just to give him some stakes. Like, to remind you that he wasn't just spending his entire time at the hospital and this was the only thing he was focusing on. There was actually something for him to lose, which, of course, depending on whether you want to wait until the literal end of the movie for there to be any consequences whatsoever, worked out fine. Actually, because of I think it's the grandma. Is that what she was?
Yeah, it was his wife's mother.
So when funny enough, especially considering, the religious overtones, I noticed that it was kind of rapid fire Jew jokes. So I started a Jew counter inside my notes, just in case this started becoming a trope. And Counter just ended up at 3. So, but it was like, man, they just rapid fired off like 3 Jew jokes all at once. And yes, May the Schwartz be with you counts as a joke as far as I'm concerned, considering I cannot believe they injected a Spaceballs reference in there. Like, really?
Yes.
I was caught off guard on that one too.
A little bit.
Yeah, and I mean that's Ed
In
Flanders.
fact, I was wondering if it
Father
came
Dyer.
from somewhere else.
I completely, that was my first what the fuck moment. I was like, did he just say it should be with you?
And it's great because I love hearing, because I, as someone who sort of is inundated with knowledge about this particular film and the novel that it's based off of, it's one of those things where I unfortunately filled in gaps from the book. And I think that you're right though, because the novel is obviously much longer, much more in depth, and there's a lot more chance to throw in these ancillary pieces that build the world and the characters. Like Kinderman's family is more present in the novel. And in the movie, I agree, there's some funny moments and some interesting moments, but they're overshadowed by these other amazing interactions, like the conversations between Kinderman and his friend Father Dyer, played by Ed Flanders, another great actor. You know, like those are really great conversations. They're witty. It's sort of like Gilmore Girls, right? But the old Jewish Jesuit priest version of Gilmore Girls, where they're rattling back and forth, and they each are talking but never quite to each other. You know, it's like Joss Whedon stepped in and was old and Jewish and wrote it.
I totally thought the first 20 minutes of this movie was I'm like, is this movie going to turn into a buddy cop movie? Is the priest going to whip out a friggin' holy shotgun Constantine style in the middle of this movie? Because that would have been awesome, honestly.
That was the exact dynamic that I was getting. Is that I was going to say it was like a buddy cop, except replace one cop with a priest. And I actually thought that's how the film was going to play out. I thought that the priest buddy was going to be there, and he was going to be the exorcist of the story. So I was surprised when he died, and I was I suppose that it's
shocking.
nice to be surprised. Yeah.
Like, I mean, the reveal of his death I thought was quite nice. It's this bizarre dream scene, like his Kinderman has a dream, and it's like it's a premonition of this murder, or potentially at the same time, right? Where he sees his friend's character dead, but they're in like a waiting room, like it's a train station, but a waiting room, and there's angels everywhere. And this scene is sort of famous because there are tons of cameos in the background. I mean, I think Kareem Abdul-Jabbar is there.
Fabio.
Fabio's in it. Fabio gets
I was like,
as an angel.
This movie?
And then you've got Samuel L. Jackson is actually a blind man in that scene, but you missed it because he's wearing glasses. You don't see him, but also they don't use his voice. They dubbed over a different voice. So and without his voice, it's very hard to tell. And I wish I could ask why they dubbed over, and if it was because he has such a particular cadence that it almost would be, distracting in a way. In a scene with people with wings and playing checkers and a band of angels playing like big band music. It's a weird scene. But I think that this film has a lot of influence on later films that we don't necessarily are aware of. Like, I especially think, and it's a famous scene from this movie, is the scene where the young nurse thinks she hears something, and it's a silent scene. It's shot from one angle down a hallway. You can see the nurse's station, a couple of doors on the left, and then the end of the wing at the far end, and there's an entrance, and a cop comes in, cop goes out, sort of thing. And the nurse thinks she hears something, and she ends up going to a patient's room, pissing him off because she wakes him up, and she gets flustered and she leaves. And then she hears something from the room next door, and she's like, I don't want to do it. And then she ends up walking across camera, and instantly following her is someone in a white robe with a giant pair of scissors, right? It's the most like, and you don't see it. I love that you don't see the murders in this film.
Yeah.
Because I think it's more effective, They're reveals, and they instead of creating a sense of nausea, which is a very American horror film thing, it has its place, right? Is a sense of dread, especially when you've gotten to know a character like Father Dyer, and you realize he's dead. You get sick with the characters, but that scene in particular, I mean, you watch Paranormal Activity, it's taking that idea and running it to the 10,000th level, right? It's a static camera. You're seeing stuff that's super realistic, someone doing their own thing, not paying attention. You're waiting. And it's pushed, in my opinion, to just the right length of time, where it's a long scene, but it's building tension instead of getting irritating, you know? And so I thought that was an interesting one.
Watching that scene, like the moment where I turned to my wife and asked, what in the hell is going on with the scene? And then it hit cut off, and I was like, oh, I got it. All right, that's exactly what they're going for. They timed it pretty much perfectly.
Yeah.
Because I totally thought it was just going to be those throwaway scenes where it was just going to build tension for no reason, and it was going to be nothing. And another one of those, it's nothing trope.
Yeah, they were going to throw in a tension sting and nothing happens, and then the camera leaves. Yeah. While we're on scenes that I personally love, let's go to Jason Miller is the actor who played Father Karras in the original Exorcist. And we don't actually see, even though he's the body that's been possessed in the insane asylum, it's actually a mental ward wing. We don't actually see him that much or hear him that much, right? Because he changes from his body and his voice to one of my favorite actors of all time, Brad Dourif, who listeners may remember as Chucky from the Child's Play movies. The best thing, I mean, fantastic voice, fantastic actor, plays a serial killer an uncomfortably large amount of times. But it goes back and forth between those two. And Jason Miller, though, I'm glad that they got him in, at least for a little bit, because his voice, let's just listen to this clip. It's a longer one, but it is fantastic.
I picked her up in Richmond, and then I dropped her off at the city dump. Some of her I kept. I missave her. Pretty dress she was wearing. Little peasant blouse, pink, and white ruffles. I still hear from her occasionally, screaming. I think the dead should shut up unless there's something to say.
I mean, this is the kind of thing that it plays out like an audiobook, right? Like just hearing that gives so many feelings and tingles and emotions that if there was background music, there's these ambient sounds of dripping. It sounds like a dungeon, right? Like it's really a psychiatric ward in the lockdown, right? He's a single cell with 2 beds and padded walls. But I mean, in this scene, it feels like you stepped into like another planet, right? Because he's got these 2 windows on the wall that just blare harsh light in 2 streams that focus on both sides of the room, both beds. And in one side, you have Jason Miller or Brad Dourif. And on the other side, you have George C. Scott as Kinderman. And it's like, it could not be more on the nose to have these 2 sides of the coin. But I was rapt. I wasn't like, ugh, like just, you know, it wasn't John Woo putting a dove flying through the scene or something where I'm like, oh, come on. I know you do it every movie. Let's move on. It was just like, oh, I'm like this.
I mean, this was 1990. I mean,
it was.
A lot of these tropes didn't even really exist quite yet. I mean,
it feels older though, doesn't it?
It does, but I mean,
like we're talking Saved by the Bell is on the pipeline, and we're watching this with nurses still wearing very the big hats, and I mean
everyone's smoking.
I think it benefits the film because it is sort of. I think even at the time it would have felt dated, and all of the characters really are older, right? Like this is not a film that features young cast. And I wonder if today, if they made this, the lead would be I don't even know. It would be Liam Hemsworth, who I like, but it would be Liam Hemsworth as Kinderman, and his priest buddy would be I don't know, but it would be maybe a great young black actor, and you'd have this great a good setup, but you couldn't pull it off because they don't have the age to put forth this sort of wiseness and world weariness that permeates the whole setup. And I'd like to counter that clip with Brad Dourif playing the same character, right? Because as Kinderman I liked this trick, whereas Kinderman sort of starts to believe that this person is sort of a version of a reincarnation of the Gemini killer, who was Brad Dourif, we assume in life. It sort of switches, so it's no longer Jason Miller playing Karras, and it's Brad Dourif. And This clip also have this signature thing that The Exorcist does a lot, which is messing with sound. Like it really, it pushes the vocals where it does some of that thing that is so old now, where the voice gets really deep and it's unhuman, inhuman, not real, overly produced. This, I think, is actually a good use of it because we know it's coming. And I would hazard to say, especially since The Exorcist had come out, some years before, we know it's coming. It's still effective because it's used just enough.
A scandal, a horror to the eyes of all men who seek faith, using the body of this saintly priest as an instrument of, my work. But the main thing is the torment of your friend, Father Karras, as he watches while I rip and cut and mutilate the innocent, his friends, and again, and again, and on and on. He is inside with us. He will never get away. His pain won't end. Oh, gracious me. Was I raving?
It's that kind of character that I want to monologue for endless amounts of time, because the intensity that Brad Dourif brings to it with his face, the spit. In this scene, he's got a broken nose, so he has the bandage on. And he's in this, what blew my mind is he's got a teardrop rolling down his eye that goes to, it's like the amount of depth that you could read into some of this is really intense. And it's not, if it was Insidious 4, this film, I guess 5 now, it would be played very differently. And I feel like that a lot of the subtlety would be removed. And you really, you need that in something like this to make it more than just a splatter flick, because this is not a splatter flick. I think William Blatty himself said that this was not a horror story to him. The novel is not a horror novel. I think some of us would disagree. It's pretty freaky.
This was spiritual horror, as I would put it. It's like if these topics don't bother you, this won't scare you. But to someone who may be fairly spiritual or religious, it's going to bother them a lot. It sure bothered my wife. She was freaked the hell out of this with this movie. And yeah. I think that performance was a lot of it, because that was honestly some of the best monologuing I've ever heard in a movie that I've never thought I would ever see in my life. Because Nate, I'm not sure you're aware of this, I've never seen The Exorcist 1 or 2.
And you know what's funny? We could have done The Exorcist, right? But right. I think The Exorcist 3, especially because sequels are usually not that good or whatever, or they have limited merit in many cases, this film has been lost. And I think that that's really unfortunate, because as questionable as it is with the reworking that the studio required, these performances, and this is 1990. George C. Scott he's only got 9 years left. He only has a few films left, and obviously nobody knew that. But this, to me, is his peak performance. This movie, it's 50% close up and medium shots of his face, right? His reacting when he reacts to the death of Father Dyer, he looks under the hood, and then it's a very real reaction. It's not over the top.
Mm-hmm. It was a good fresh watch for me, especially because there were a lot of little details that I noticed and that I kept going, what the hell is he doing? Because I've never seen the first 2 movies, didn't know if there was going to be any connection. Mm-hmm. And there was some slow burns. Like every corpse I noticed, he was pulling up the sheet and checking. I'm like, what the hell is he checking for? And then
it's revealed he's looking for the marks of the Gemini kill.
Yeah, it gives me the answer in a reasonable amount of time, as opposed to another movie, which we'll talk about later.
I will say there's some interesting backstory, and it's conflicting information about Jason Miller as Father Karras and Brad Dourif playing the same character. Is that the official story, and William Peter Blatty said this, is that Jason Miller was not going to reprise his role because of scheduling conflicts. And apparently in the original intent or the original version, Jason Miller wasn't in it at all. It would be Brad Dourif in the cell the whole time, and you would just basically, he would say, like, I assume Kinderman would be like, it's Father Karras or whatever, but that didn't happen. And part of it was the studio saying, no, we have to have Jason Miller reprise this role. We don't want to lose, like, people are expecting a sequel. We don't want to lose this character. But it's interesting then that if it's really a scheduling conflict, that he doesn't just play the character then, right? Because I mean, he could have just played the character as himself. He's got a great voice, do all that stuff. Well, Brad Dourif says that Jason Miller could not do the roles because of extended alcohol abuse has given him wet brain, and he could no longer remember the monologues. So according to Brad Dourif, he could only do the bits that were a few lines. So I don't know. You can believe who you want. I think they're both fantastic actors. But I think that's pretty interesting to get that weird snippet. Because honestly, I think Jason Miller killed the lines that he did have. But it's very limited. And I don't know that you know, like I said, if he could do it, they're all in one room, the same room that he had to be there in for reshoots anyway. You probably could have gotten him to do the monologues if he could have done the monologues. So, you know, draw your own conclusions there. But talking a lot about the background of this film and how the production company insisted on changes. George C. Scott, who, as I said, didn't apparently get along with William Peter Blatty that much, he actually said in later interviews that William Peter Blatty did the best that he could, and everyone on set gave 100% as much as they could, given the circumstances of forced changes. And I think that that's true, because even in the exorcism itself, which I think is probably, even though there's some nice effects and stuff, I think it's the weakest. It clearly is shoehorned in there, right? I think that they still were committed. It's just, you know, you can only elevate a hacked idea so much, right, while you're acting. There is, the reason we review the theatrical cut is because it's the one most people have access to or could get access to. However, in 2016, Scream Factory, or Shout Factory, well, it's the same company, their horror imprint, released a re-pieced together director's cut of William Peter Blatty's original vision, and they just entitled it his original title, Legion. Now, this film is shorter. And it keeps, the problem is that technically the footage is actually, the original footage is lost. The original handlers of it, according to William Peter Blatty's wife, lost it. It's not expected to be recovered, but they did have a lot of other things like work prints and dailies where the footage is low quality film, but it is the original footage. So they worked really hard to get this back together. I totally encourage you to watch it if you're interested at all in this. I will say the quality dips substantially up and down through the footage. So it's probably more of interest to film fanatics who are our audience, and people who really like this movie and want to see another take on it, rather than people who just want to watch it for the first time. If you're a normal moviegoer and you are totally happy seeing something that looked polished, professional, and as intended for theatrical release, then stick with this theatrical cut, which I still think is worth a watch, especially if you are a supernatural horror fan. If nothing else, for the characterization and performances. It's hard to go to another film after you watch seasoned actors do work at the top of their game.
Yeah.
So
definitely a lot of top scenes in that film.
Yeah.
I'd say as a whole, it's not, doesn't come all together, especially the end, but the scenes are exceptional.
Yeah, Brad Dourif himself, I believe, said it could have been a masterpiece or a great film, and it ended up being mediocre because of the changes. And as we often hear, production houses just don't always believe that audiences are smart enough to enjoy a really excellent film. And that's sad, right? Because I can't even disagree with them all the time. I mean, we've had some really good films. I mean, Birds of Prey was a very fun film. It was a great comic book movie. It stands, in my opinion, level with some of the tops, right? I mean, it's DC's attempt at Deadpool, and it was a pretty good one, but people didn't like it. A lot of people didn't like it. Critics loved it, the people who went and saw it, but it didn't make as much money. And that's the question, right? As far as producers are concerned, can I make my money back? I don't care about the rest. I'll make Pitch Perfect 5 if it's going to make more money. I'm not going to take a risk, especially when less people are going to the physical films. But any closing words at the moment on Exorcist 3 before we move on?
Yeah, it's funny that you mentioned DC, because did you notice that other cameo?
Which one?
The Joker cameo. I paused the movie just to get a good look at it. I was like, that's the friggin' Joker.
Yes, it does look very Joker-like. Yes.
I mean, just the smile, everything, and it brought to mind the fact that I feel like it was intentional, because some of that monologuing, I feel like someone had looked at the Joker back in that time, because this was 1990 or 1989, especially if they started production before then. That Joker was really just kind of starting to form up, and
sure.
I'm not sure if it. I don't know if it was on purpose, but it was there.
That's a good question, because I do remember that, because I got it too. I mean, there's a couple instances too, especially there's a couple of severed Christ statue heads that are painted up in essentially blackface at one point, and there's a couple of times when facial coverings are used or something like that, and it's just as unnerving now as it ever was. I mean, there's a reason that in the recent remake of Pet Sematary, which maybe we'll talk about it another time, I'm not a fan, but they use animal masks on the children in several scenes because covering the face is freaky. Yes. Right? You can't see what's behind it. It's the hidden thing. And that's really a core element of this film is it's not what it seems, right? Nothing is what it seems. It's not a simple killer as it seems. It's not your friend come back from the dead as it seems. There's several levels underneath the surface. And I think that characters like Kinderman and Father Dyer, the reason their dialogue is so interesting is because it's all focused on pointing it out and peeling it away. They're well aware it's there, and sometimes they just give up because they're tired. That scene where Father Dyer is like, he's talking to a student, and the student says something like, he asks him a question like, isn't this what it's all about? And Father Dyer is like, you tell me. And he goes, oh, maybe it's not. And he goes, I like a guy who knows his mind. It's like he's digging at him, right? He's like, it's just that kind of storytelling where you're not really telling the audience exactly what they're getting from it. They're understanding it and thinking about it, and it puts us on another level. It's the kind of movie that I had to sit down, and it took me a minute to get into it because it was more intellectual than one might expect.
I had the stage set pretty much as soon as the Macbeth reference happened. I was like, all right, that's going to be important. Yeah. And lo and behold, it was, because there was a lot of crisis of faith throughout the entire movie, even if it was subtext. Yeah. There was a lot of it.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Any closing thoughts on this one, Jeff?
Well, actually, one interesting thing for people who go and watch this is watch out for kind of a pre-Twitter age where there's lots of basically signs on walls that are kind of like just phrases or something that you would normally find on Twitter these days. Like I psychotic is someone more neurotic than his doctor. Is a thing that's on the doctor's wall.
The hospital is full of signs everywhere, and they and Blatty makes sure to get them. Like they're if they're not an intentional slow shot of the wall, they're clearly readable in the background. Yeah. And it adds
I enjoyed that moment because you wouldn't do that today. Like it's just like those types of things get put out in different ways.
The touches, like you said, Tad, there are details everywhere.
There really are.
And not a one isn't worth paying attention to.
There was nothing wasted as far as I was concerned.
That's what I like to see, and it makes it for an interesting watch, even if it's not ultimately 100% successful. That brings us to the next film, right? Like we here at Cult and Classic like to pair two thematically linked films. I would say Exorcist III, it's a mainstream film. It got a theater release, but it's largely forgotten except for fans of the series, and it's on the edge of mainstream. This film, I would say, is solidly in cult territory. 2015's Shark Exorcist. This film was written and directed by Donald Farmer. who is, let's see, Joe Bob Briggs, famed genre reviewer and TV personality, R.I.P. Monster Vision, although he has his new show on Shudder. Let's see here. I believe he said about Donald Farmer that he is an exploitation cheapie meister, Donald Farmer, the one-man film industry of Tennessee. I think that's probably true. I'm not sure how much film is happening in Tennessee, but I bet that Donald Farmer is probably the head of it, because I think he's made, since 1987 when we started, I think he's made like 27, 28 films, somewhere around there. I actually am a big fan of one of his first, if not his first film from 87, Cannibal Hookers, which he actually did a remake of his own film in 2018 and has released it. And I look forward to talking about that at another time. But this film that we're going to talk about is called Shark Exorcist. The plot on this one is a little harder to summarize.
You're right. It's also much simpler.
There's a lot of ways we could tackle this one. This is from 2015, and it is it's about a woman who is possessed by a demonic shark spirit that is released into a local lake by a serial killing nun that we only see twice in the film.
With no motivation?
No, we get her backstory via a radio. But there's a radio playing at the beginning that you don't know where the radio is playing from. It's just in the air as this nun is walking towards the water. Now, there are a lot of actually actors in this film that are very unconnected from one another. There are scenes that are completely disconnected. Would you agree?
I think I had a comment that basically said, since this movie is just one giant B plot, I'm gonna call this C plots. And how many of them do I goddamn need?
Yeah, there's a lot. I mean, there's the nun, which we don't see. We only see at the beginning and the end. And I use the term "end" loosely, and we'll get to that. But there's the nurse plot. There is at one point 3 girls in their 20s doing trying to conjure a spirit in a graveyard that is never visited or referenced to my knowledge. There's another scene where a girl in a graveyard is just writhing and spitting blood near a gravestone. There is the main plot, I would say, which is 3 friends going to the lake for a day. One of them gets possessed and she starts sharking out, I guess. Like a couple of scenes, she bites some people. She has weird dreams. And then there's the plot. I don't know if you can call this a plot. There's the character of the paranormal television host who gets possessed. And then there's
also writhes a lot.
Yeah, and there's no connection between these people. And then there's also mid-credits, there is a 7.5-minute scene of a character we've never seen who doesn't speak, in a mall that has a little aquarium and a gift store, and she sort of fondles a bunch of stuffed sharks for 7 minutes and then spits some ooze, and then it goes back to more credits. So this is a hard one to tackle because
no. I don't think this is hard for us to tackle at all. Maybe it's hard for you to tackle. I think Jeff and I can handle this.
Okay. What's your interpretation on this?
So let me tell you that I basically thought that end credit scene, if it had been shortened to 45 seconds, would have been better than the rest of the entire goddamn movie. That scene was actually at least semi-competently filmed. It didn't require any dialogue, which was great because nobody knew how to do dialogue in this movie anyway. So the more people were silent, the better the acting was. One of the best actors in the movie was that guy who didn't talk. He just walked around that fair.
Here's the thing. I'm gonna say that this uncomfortably shows me one of your hidden kinks, because there is no way that 7.5-minute film of a girl rubbing hand-sized stuffed sharks all over her body while rolling around the wall in front of a Claim Jumper burger restaurant is the best part of the movie. I will hands down disagree with that. I don't know what about that is, but I don't want to see her
kind of agree with Tad only because there's no dialogue.
You know what though?
And so you have a low bar. And so you have something slightly over that very, very low bar.
So notice that I said if it was shortened to 45 seconds, I didn't say which 45 seconds.
Because to be fair, this film actually does have a lot of scenes with no dialogue, and I don't think it helps. I actually, because the
like
scenes
the pervert scene where
the-
there's
Oh
a
my
lady
God.
walking across
this is the
field.
best scene. This is the best scene. This is the scene where there. Now I don't know, because in the credits, a lot of the women are credited as names, like, oh, she played Holly, so on. But they're not referenced by name in the film, so I don't know who these people are. And some of them don't have other film credits available easily. So I don't know who this actress was, but she's clearly a fitness expert or a bodybuilder. She's very fit.
Yes, she's fit.
And
strong.
she's stripping down to a bikini and walking towards the lake. And she puts out a towel and her phone, like very realistic, and lays out to sunbathe, although I don't know. Is there a lot of sunbathing in Tennessee? Is that where this? Anyway,
it was a cloudy day.
Right.
Very clearly not a day you go and do this.
I don't know, but she's laying down, and then a character who's only credited as Beach Dad by name in the credits just proceeds to skulk around a tree and just walk around her while she, I guess, sleeps, taking a lot of photos of her. And what is especially interesting about this scene is that we're seeing the photos on his phone from over the shoulder as he meticulously takes them.
Oh my God!
While staring at her, we see her, and then we see her again on the. There's no.
Also, there's glare on the screen. Just put a friggin' blanket behind him or something. Jesus Christ!
It's like everything in this movie was designed to meticulously waste my time.
Here's the thing.
That was a very long scene.
I'm gonna be honest. It is. I'm gonna be honest. I think that Donald Farmer has succeeded in out Terrence Malicking Terrence Malick in this movie. Like Tree of Life and his other films, like you don't need cameos by Brad Pitt or Bryce Dallas Howard to make a film weird and odd and completely unintelligible. You can just do this, and it's a lot cheaper. And that's my take on it. Now,
well, to me, it felt like there was like maybe the idea that was started with was about like 10 minutes of film. And so to make a feature film, it was kind of like that thing you do in high school when you're writing your papers and you're like, oh, I got to fill 12 pages. It's like, oh, shit, let me just put together this, 15-minute long scene where this pervert just walks around this lady taking photos. And, well, that was only 5 minutes. Let's have him swipe through them and then look at each one individually. It was just like kind of added on, and just kind of this run on.
So the movie, I think, is about 71 minutes. And apparently, if I just roughly timed it, clicking through, it's about 11 minutes of credits and credit scenes. So that really drops it down to a solid hour of scenes crammed together. And there is, I mean, those of us listening, it's hard to tell. There is a primary plot and a lead character in this movie. And I mean, her name is, the character's name is Allie, and it's played by Angela Carex. I'm probably butchering her name, but she's actually been in a lot of stuff. She often is a side character about, because she plays a lot of, and this is not a diss, she plays a lot of sex workers in television shows and films, like she fits the role really well.
And she felt to me like she could act, but maybe was not like
there's no opportunity
back.
Yeah. And I agree. I encourage people to check out one of her other films, which is, if you like schlock, and let me tell you, if you're listening and you're thinking about watching Shark Exorcist, we guarantee that you do. She played, oh gosh, what is it called? It's a series, and there's often shorts. Oh no, Thong Girl, the Thong Girl shorts. Okay, they're science fiction films. She plays Thong Girl in Thong Girl vs. Zolta from Outer Space. It is a short. Check it out. It's a lot of fun. And you know what? You're right. It showed me that she can actually act, even though it's a super campy, ridiculous film. She can act, but you got to give her something, right? And in this case, She held her own better than anybody else, but there's not a lot to work with. I actually think that this might be a case where there wasn't a huge amount of script, and Donald Farmer probably encouraged them to ad lib. Angela Carrick's husband is also in this film. He plays the priest, Father Michael. Now I'm gonna play this clip here because this made me laugh. This is near the end, the actual exorcism, which there is in this film. She's possessed by the shark demon devil, something like that. I know I'm talking with my hands here. It's always good for a podcast to have a visual reference, right? She's being exorcised, and her friend is there, and she just vomits a bunch of exorcist-style goo all over the priest. And this is the priest's response. Here we go.
Damn you! No, priest. Damn you. Damn her. For all eternity.
I'll kill you!
No! No, you'll hurt her!
Oh, sorry.
He literally gets vomited on, and then he starts choking the possessed woman, at which point her friend says, "Stop, you're hurting her, you'll kill her." And he goes, "Oh, sorry." This is the priest in this film. And that scene, I paused it. I had to. I paused it and I rewound it several times because it was the dichotomy of this was too much to take, and it's my favorite scene from the film. I prefer this one to the shark toy writhing scene.
If we want to talk about writhing, there's plenty of writhing scenes.
There's a lot. Here's another one. Let's play another clip. I think we've got the time. This is the reporter that I mentioned earlier. She's the host of a paranormal show, right? And I actually think that this was a good idea because there are a ton of paranormal reality shows on. I watch them all, and you could really nail this. I think that this was a little off because I don't think that this actress, who's also done a lot of other work, was really given much. But she plays Nancy Chase, and it's Roni Jonah, who's in a lot of other stuff. You can check her out on IMDb if you want. But this is the second time, I guess, she's gotten possessed at the lake with her cameraman filming her. Let's take a listen.
I call upon the spirit of the water, the malevolent presence from hell. I know you're there. I felt you. You've infected me, possessed me. And the shark attacking the swimmers. I know that's you. That is your evil. I know it is. Show yourself. Show yourself. Yes. Oh, I can feel you. Oh, come inside me. Spirits, yes.
Yeah. So that's an interesting one. It is like every other writhing in this movie, right? Like it's weirdly sexualized, that's fine for writhing, especially in an Exorcist demon movie. I mean, The Exorcist itself was no stranger to that. This though, let me just say this about this particular character. She's filmed at several different days wearing what appear at first glance to be different outfits, but it's actually the same outfit. She's just taken one layer off of a shirt that she had previously had buttoned up. So I don't know what kind of budget would have been on this paranormal show, but I have a feeling it was not larger than the budget for Shark Exorcist itself, because that's a quick change if I've ever seen one.
Well, I know the budget for Shark Exorcist, so I can tell you, no way that they'd have that much money. There's no way.
Well,
by the way, I loved the fantastic sound editing. It was very realistic, where there was a constant drone of the wind in the microphone to make sure that I couldn't really hear the dialogue anyway.
Yes.
Hyper realistic. I thought that was a great touch.
And that's actually one of the points with this movie is that there are no sets in this film. It is filmed at actual locations. Unfortunately, you can tell because a lot of that stuff has that good old Tennessee wind, which I didn't know existed until I saw this movie. I assume it's filmed in Tennessee. this, you can tell in that clip too, right? Like there are moments when like she goes from the wind to the back and then I'm back, and it's because she's turning her head, right? And we can't hear her because it's all being recorded, I assume, with an on-camera mic. So sound is like the biggest killer of cinema sometimes, because if I can't hear someone, I want to put my fist through the screen. I don't know that this one was that bad. I could hear most things, but it's very much not.
That jumped out at me. That was bad. The rest of it wasn't that. Was fine. The sound was fine through most of it.
Yeah. There's one scene. You got Jeff. Is there any scene that stuck out to you as particularly what the fuck?
Oh my god! So there's one scene where there's the mean girl bringing her like 2 pledges or whatever to the lake. She was gonna force them to go swimming.
I forgot that subplot.
And so like they're kind of like they have like their feet into the water. They're just kind of like wading in, and the mean girl is like kind of telling them to go in like deeper and deeper. And then all of a sudden, there's just this like maybe 3 frames of just a shark, and then the 2 girls are like screaming, and it's just like
it's shocking. It's shocking we've got this far into the discussion about Shark Exorcist, and this is the first time we have mentioned a shark. There's a reason for that. If you were turned off by either sharks or exorcists in movies, you don't have to be afraid to watch Shark Exorcist because they're barely there.
There is no shark, and there's not really an exorcist in the
shark. The shark is a 3D rendered shark, probably mid-2000s level Sci-Fi Channel quality, which, hey, I'm fine with that. It does seem to be like it's probably one loop that was just cut up over a couple of times of this shark. The biggest downfall is that there is never a person on screen with this shark ever. The shark has a fantastic really orange eye, fire eye thing, and I wish that there was a little bit more, but it's just not there. The violence in general, the effects in this, it's like ketchup on the skin in most cases. Like you could usually see it, especially when they're in the water, you can see it sloughing off, and there's no.
Or somebody gets stabbed and there's no wound or even a kind of a,
right.
Yeah.
Yes.
An attempt at creating something wound-like.
Sure. And there are lots of stabbings and death and thing in this movie. So I mean, if that's your thing, it's there, but don't expect any. This is the low budget maestro at work, right? This is definitely personally, I find this kind of film inspiring actually, because it's like, oh, I can make a movie, right? Like we've all seen these, right? Like it's like, I can make a movie. Yeah, exactly. We've made our share of bizarre films.
Okay, I needed to make this comment after I was done with this film. This was almost like a vision of the future for me. Imagine if Zombie Dance had a $300,000 budget. This is exactly probably what would have happened.
I'm gonna say I wish that maybe we could have done a little bit more with $300,000, but I mean, my biggest criticism is that the plot is it's a 10-minute film with a lot of added scenes crammed in that don't really have any relation to it. And that's probably my biggest frustration. I mean, this happened all the time in the 50s, 60s, 70s, even the 80s, right? Like they usually when a film company would acquire a film that was partially done, or they're like, oh, this is from Hong Kong and there's this whole subsection that doesn't mean anything to American audiences, let's cram in a sex scene and throw in an American actor to fight the monster or the Chinese vampire or whatever. They'll splice it all together and then you get a movie like Ninja Warrior or something. So we've seen this before, but what's kind of shocking is that Donald Farmer seems to have made it this way, right? Like this, I don't think this is 2 separate films, right? There are characters that carry over into other Donald Farmer films, which I think is commendable. I like the sort of shared universe.
The Donald Farmer extended universe?
Yes, the Donald Farmer shared universe, because the character who played the TV host, Nancy Chase, her name is Rona Jonah, she played a character, Brianna Bennett, in a later film, Cannibal Cop from 2017 that Donald Farmer did. Big fan. But in this film, that character is present, but played by Kristen Van Hooser. So same person, playing or same character being played by a different person who's also in this movie at the same time. Real weird shit. Like I gotta start to diagram out the characters that repeat in his movies, because I think that there's a real Stephen King vibe going on here, and I'm into it.
I think you gotta draw that up, and you gotta post it. We'll put a nice big diagram up.
So you were we took a short break. You were saying something, Tad, about your impression of this as a whole.
Yeah, this was probably the shittiest episode of Are You Afraid of the Dark I ever watched.
They rebooted that series, you know?
Yes, I do know that. I haven't watched the reboot yet, honestly. I'm going. Oh, don't worry about it.
The thing I remember the most is that they ripped off They Live in an episode, which was awesome. I loved it. It was fantastic.
Oh, that was one of my favorite episodes.
It's the best episode. It's so good. So there's a scene. This scene is, I think, especially right now, and when we're more socially aware of women's rights, LGBTQIA rights, this one, it's actually two scenes, but this one small arc is the most unsettling, bizarre. This is one reason I'm glad I watched this movie, especially for this moment, because it is so weird. I'm gonna play it for you, and then we'll talk about it.
Hi, I didn't see you here. Wanna play?
I like your sharks.
Me too, sharks are so cool. No, please don't eat me! No, I'm gonna eat you right now. What are the good parts?
So what do you like about sharks?
Everything, really.
Okay, so the character that asks, what do you like about sharks? That's the lead, Angela Carricks's character, Allie. The one she's talking to she's credited as a pool girl in the credits. Her name is Gracie Rogers, the actress. She's working in sound in another film, but otherwise this seems to be her first on-screen performance. Now, this is on a playground, and I still don't know if she's supposed to be a child or a differently abled person.
Yeah,
with different faculty,
like,
right?
Behind, yeah.
Because what happens is it goes from this scene to a scene at a pool with Allie and this pool girl character, where she coerces the pool girl to get into the pool in a skimpy bathing suit, and then seduces her. I'm pretty sure that what we're watching is an adult woman seducing a mentally developmentally abled is the proper term, right? Developmentally abled person in a swimming pool. And then she wakes up and it's all been a dream. What a dream. Because I don't know how to handle that or how to work that into this at all. Because it doesn't, I'm like, is she horrified? Because, oh my gosh, I seduced, or that I'm going to eat her? I don't even know what happened. All I know is that it seemed like the type of moment where everyone's clothes were supposed to come off. It didn't happen. It didn't happen.
I was like, wow, this is an exploitation movie with very little violence and very little sex. In fact, very little anything.
I was genuinely surprised at the lack of nudity throughout the whole film.
I was too. Yeah.
I thought that of all the things that you go into making a film, let's try and make them feel something, like some emotions, like happiness, sadness. The easiest one is just arousal. Like, hey, I can't actually make.
It's easy for some of us, Jeff. I don't know. Some of us might have different tastes. Tad, there's not a lot of shark rubbing film scenes. But no,
okay, but you get my point though.
Absolutely. I was shocked that there was no nudity in this film. There are a lot of beautiful women in bathing suits and so on, but I was surprised, especially because Donald Farmer is no stranger to nudity. I mean, like I said, my favorite film by him is Cannibal Hookers, 1987. There's nudity in his films, and so I don't know if maybe this was an intent to hit a different market, if it was cut this way in order to play maybe on Sci-Fi Channel. It does feel like that might have been an aim, but it's too disjointed, right? Like even like like Sharktopus by Roger Corman. Love that movie. It's intentional camp all the way, but there's a plot that goes from A all the way to Z, and scenes may be hilarious for all the wrong reasons, intentionally or unintentionally, probably intentionally, but it doesn't, like, this one does not have that thread that carries it through.
Yeah, well, so back to the point of like that dream sequence. So when you're kind of like making these dream sequences, like sometimes directors and scriptwriters will put in like kind of clues and hints to like some kind of abstract idea that they're trying to get across. And so in this case, like we don't know enough about anything else that's going on in this story to kind of piece those things together. So it's, I don't know, was there some sort of hidden message here? And I could describe that about the whole film. There's like not enough pieces. You have like great films like Inception that will leave one little piece out, that last piece of the puzzle. And some people love it. Some people are infuriated by it.
The coin stopped, Jeff. The coin stopped.
Yes. So you end up with this, this whole thing, and you're missing that one piece. This film is like, you open the box and there's like 5 pieces of one puzzle, 5 pieces of another puzzle, and there's just not enough to get you even into the like seeing a picture.
You're playing Mousetrap. You're playing Mousetrap with the pieces from Monopoly. I know. Like,
yeah, exactly. Yeah,
it's a lot of different stuff. And I mean, the idea of the dream sequence you brought up is brilliant, right? Because the dream sequence we mentioned in Exorcist 3, it's like a train station / waiting station for all the people who've died, sort of. It looks like a weird limbo that's set up like Grand Central, and there's all these people of different casts and things going on. This one, I don't know.
We don't know enough about the character to understand anything psychological about what is going on in this dream, right?
And there is a little bit of like, I mean, let's not even get into Todd Phillips and whether or not the Joker actually killed his apartment neighbors, because, and the reason I mentioned that is because he's like, no, of course he didn't. It's like, you don't know what's real. I'm like, okay, well, it looked pretty fucking real, Todd Phillips. Okay, what I'm saying is that this film, especially in that dream sequence, you don't know what's real, and it's hard to differentiate. Like, did she meet this girl and then the pool seduction is a dream sequence, or is this
real and it's like a werewolf that killed a deer
and then
scenario?
Or is this girl just in her brain, at which point what does that signify, right?
Yeah,
like, is it a lost innocence?
A younger person that she was brunette then? Who knows?
Yeah. and I will give it to Gracie Rogers playing Pool Girl. It's uncomfortably developmentally disabled in appearance, right? She doesn't go halfway, okay? She goes full, right? She Tropic Thunders that with the facial expressions, even when she's in the pool in her bathing suit. And there's this weird line she does when Angela Carrex's character is in the pool, and she's like being sexy, and it's taken 5 minutes for her to walk from the sidewalk into the pool, and then the pool girl character is standing above, and she's in her normal clothes, and she goes, I know where this is going, and then she unzips and takes it off and jumps in the pool, and you're like, what do you mean by that?
I was physically uncomfortable in that.
Yeah.
That when she said it, I said it at the same time. And then it turns out that my expectations were subverted, and it was 2 years before Ryan Johnson did it.
Kudos to you, Donald Farmer, for totally flipping us out. And I was wrong as well. I guess to me, this is actually the most successful sequence of scenes in the film, because I was like wrapped I was paying attention. I was paying attention to this moment. Some of the other ones, the nurse, I keep saying nurse, the nun, I think Mother Mary is what her actual name is. Elaine Huntington played her. There was no connection to me. She curses the people for firing her and the police for looking for her because she killed a bunch of children. We only know this from that weird radio snippet in the beginning. And then she stabs someone who confronts her at one point.
Who was that person?
I don't know.
Yeah.
And it's just, and then she's like, curse them, Satan possessed this shark in the lake. Like that was rough for me. I didn't follow. I felt like the rest of the film could have literally not had a shark.
Yeah.
And it would have been more on par.
Here's actually the thing that bothers me most about that. So you have like, imagine you're a demon in hell for a second. You believe in that, and that's like something you're looking up, and you're like, okay, let me go and possess a bunch of old ladies, and old men. That's The Exorcist III, and that's actually an absurd premise. You look up and say, oh, let me possess a fucking shark with the big bitey teeth and go on a murder spree. That seems like a little bit more plausible for what a demon would be doing. You didn't need to do some sort of crazy stretch here to get into the film. It's just it's a fucking shark, man. It's a bitey monster. Just go and possess that thing.
That's it. That's Jeff's IMDb review. It's a fucking shark.
It just makes sense.
So I guess your premise requires that the shark already be in the lake.
Why can't we can make this Jaws? Why can't it be an ocean? Was there not an ocean near Tennessee? Is that why this had to be this way?
I will give them. We haven't covered that yet. They plugged a plot hole I totally didn't expect them to. The first thing I thought was, why in the fuck is a shark able to be in a lake? And then they actually went back and addressed it. I was like, wow, that I got to give them credit. They actually addressed that plot point.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, they, well, so the filmmakers, who I assume is Donald Farmer, I don't know who they get these quotes from when you find them online in various places like IMDb, but they say it's a cross between The Exorcist and Jaws. Unfortunately, I do think that fails a bit because The Exorcist was about an exorcism and Jaws was about a shark. And this film actually isn't about either.
Yes.
Right? Like, this film is more about a woman becoming progressively irritated and insatiable sexually, who then decides to bite someone.
And she also enjoys the water.
She does like the water.
She becomes obsessed with water.
To be fair, that is I liked that. Like, that was, that was on par there with the concept. It panned out for me.
Yeah, but it really was like more of like almost like a zombie film because it was like biting and passing on.
Yes, right.
This, like, disease or demon possession or whatever. Because it wasn't like in The Exorcist, a demon moved from body to body.
It's Satan herpes.
It just it was like Satan. Yeah, this was like shark Satan herpes. Yeah. It was weird.
Which, by the way, our president tweeted today that came from a lab in China. Shark Satan herpes is China's fault.
You've heard it here first.
So Pete. Right, exactly. from our president to your ears. So this movie, I guess my biggest thing watching it, because a lot of people think that they've seen like a bad movie, right? Like, and in this field, I don't consider the phrase a bad movie to be necessarily a negative thing, right? There's some fantastic movies that I love that are bad movies.
You've seen some fantastic bad movies.
Oh, exactly. My biggest difficulty with this one is it's hard to classify as a movie sometimes because it's really all over the place. Like, the plot is so dismembered that I had a hard time.
Have a protagonist, you don't really have a conclusion. You don't. It just has so many things that it's missing. And not to say you need all of those to be classified as a film, but you maybe have to have some of them.
Right. I think that's the case. And I mean, you've got like the weird little tag at the end, like even after the mid-credit scene where the girl rubs sharks on herself at a gift store. You've got credits, and then you've got a tag at the end, which is the Nancy Chase TV character alive but clearly possessed or a zombie or something at a water station, and she's like, and then it's the end of the movie. And I mean, I like that. I'm like, I would love if Donald Farmer actually has carried that into other films where like that character comes back, like, you know what I mean? Why not? If you're gonna do this, maybe we're looking at it wrong then, right? Maybe instead of a film, it's like we're trying to understand Empire Strikes Back without having seen A New Hope and never seeing Return of the Jedi, right? We're stuck in Japan and that middle film is gone, or we're somewhere else and we just got the middle film. It's like we watched an episode of One Life to Live 30 years into the show and expect to understand everything that's happening.
That's the best reach I think I've ever heard. Wow. Especially from a movie where a dude basically throws up and goes, "Gosh, she's hot. I'd still bang her."
Yeah, what was that scene? So, so the humor, does it land? Does the humor land?
No, and listen, the reason it doesn't land is because I feel like there was a complete disconnect where the movie tries to take itself too seriously and then completely doesn't. You kind of got to strike that balance. You kind of also have to be funny.
Well, I mean, and I mean, Super Troopers 2 would disagree with you. But that was a low blow. It was an easy target. I will say, those of you watching a video of us, or if you go on IMDb, the cover for Shark Exorcist is pretty fantastic. It says "Satan has jaws" is their tagline, and it's
a fantastic shark. It
is.
Demon
it's great.
Shark. I can buy into
fire and everything.
It bears no resemblance to the actual shark or exorcist or scene in the film, but if you will not be disappointed if you buy the DVD and which is available, and tack it up on your wall. That is pretty cool looking. I will grant it that.
Yeah, I would argue that piece of artwork, the cover, is really selling the film. Like that's what you go. Yeah,
it's selling it so well. I want to sue for false advertising.
Oh, yeah,
but
But I guess this movie. So it feels a lot longer than 71 minutes.
Nate,
is it? Well, okay. I had to rewatch it in little segments to try and kind of piece together what was happening. I never got there, but I did watch large portions of it twice.
I would be interested.
So it was longer than 71 minutes for me.
Total runtime was an hour and 10 minutes, and I went, "Oh, thank God, it's only an hour and 10 minutes." Then I found out that the actual length of the movie was 71 minutes. Nathan, guess how long it took me to watch this?
How?
3 hours. It took me 3 hours to get through this.
That's your problem. Some bad movies are like a Band-Aid. You got to peel it off all at once.
I tried to, but I needed to stop and just absorb what I had just witnessed.
It's true. And I'm telling you, for me, that was the special ed seduction scene. That was like the one where I was like, I have to reevaluate what this whole thing is. And then after that, I believe, is when comes the beach dad taking photographs scene, which
that beach dad scene happened immediately after the big Exorcist scene, which
so it's near the
made
end,
it even that more jarring, because you have this like weird awkward climactic moment, and then it's just like flat
and then
for like 10 minutes, and you're like, what am I watching?
And it has
just watched the big climactic moment.
That scene does not tie in any way to the shark or any of the other characters, as far as we know, right? Like, I mean, it's literally just there.
Yes.
I think you could probably make several good drinking games out of this. Every time a new character is introduced, you could do that. Every time a new character is killed, you could do one. Every time the credits start, you could do it, and you get more
real
than one.
About that.
I will give them credit. You mentioned earlier, Jeff, the scene where the head of a sorority is like forcing these two pledges to walk into the lake that's supposedly got a killer shark in it, right? And that's like their pledge thing. Hazing, right? And she's a huge bitch, by the way. In this, that character is just irredeemable, but. I appreciate them using, like, they're not both the skinny model type that we've seen in the class. They're normal people, and that was actually, and they're in bathing suits and they go out in the lake, and that was actually kind of refreshing to see real people.
I actually had the exact same kind of feeling towards that scene.
I was like, it made me think. I'm like, Donald Farmer, if you're listening, and I hope you do, put me in a movie. I'll fly out. I swear. We'll do it. It's going to be Shark Exorcist 2. I am in the can. Let's do it. Let's go.
Problem is that it's a package deal. He has to bring me and Jeff along too.
Oh well, there you killed my chances.
After all the acting I've done for you too.
It's true. You both have been my primary stable of talented actors. So
that's a good robot.
Jeff was a great robot. Just since I was brought up, I once put Jeff in like, I don't know what was it pantyhose? I think it was the tightest non-breathable plastic material stretched over his face, and then I put a plastic like dollar store like woman's face mask over it that I spray painted with a gloss black paint that never dried for some reason. Whatever chemical compound would not dry, and so it smelled like paint. And I had that taped to his face, and he couldn't hear very well or see, and it was a hot day, and I had him in that for a long time. Yeah. And then I would do things like I had him pushed against a wall, and I was like, you know what? I directed a lot like Donald Farmer directed Shark Exorcist.
I writhed against a wall for you. I actually have credits that prove that I could be in a Donald Farmer.
You know what? Cat's out of the bag. I'm Donald Farmer. I've done it. I didn't want to say anything. I'm just kidding. Donald Farmer, by the way, he will be on the show. I'm interviewing him in the coming weeks. Stay tuned. Fantastic guy. Really excited to hear his take all the way from Demon Lover and Cannibal Hookers all the way up to Cannibal Cop and his recent remake of Cannibal Hookers. So stay tuned for that. Let's wrap it up with some parting words here. Let's take a look at Exorcist III, Legion. Tad, who would you recommend this movie to?
Which one?
Exorcist III.
Okay, Exorcist III. Honestly, Exorcist III I would recommend to, aside from people who have already watched Exorcist 1 and 2 and somehow missed out on this, I'd recommend it to, honestly, anyone who is intrigued by the concept of a movie that really digs into as I mentioned before, a spiritual or a psychical horror. Or anyone who really just enjoys some good dialogue. Also, anyone who really enjoyed George C. Scott in Man Getting Hit by Football, which was one of his best roles of all time.
That's true. How could we forget? All right, same question, Jeff. Who would you recommend the Exorcist III Legion to?
Yeah, I think that I would key on the dialogue element that Tad mentioned. Really just if you're looking for some like really good kind of cinematic scenes or basically big moments where you have a lot of emotion and characters kind of playing off each other very well. I would say that type of person. I wouldn't even give this a thumbs up for people who like horror or these types of genre films. It's really like, you're looking for the moment in the cell. It's like the Clarice and Hannibal Lecter scene between the main character and the serial killer. Like that's the type of stuff that I think really plays well in this film. So it's really your kind of hardcore kind of scene junkies.
And I would agree with you both. And I would also say, I think screenwriting students or people who just are screenwriters in general, this is like The Exorcist, and more so than The Exorcist, William Peter Blatty's other script. I think this is how you turn a dense dialogue and conceptual and, as Jeff said, internal conflict heavy story into a screenplay that doesn't bore the audience, doesn't inundate with exposition, despite a weak ending caused by production issues. I think that this is one to watch where you can be like, oh, that's how I can do that. And you can really tune up your work and make it better going forward. And I think that that's a solid reason to watch that movie. Now, Shark Exorcist by Donald Farmer, 2015. Tad, who would you recommend this to?
I would recommend this movie to budding filmmakers as a cautionary tale. And also, as you mentioned before, this would probably make a great drinking game that probably would result in some fatalities, depending on how you set the rules.
Jeff?
Really is just people in my mind that want to have a laugh at something. I respect this man who, goes and puts his art forward, and, it's a big thing, but really what's there is more something to enjoy laughing at rather than enjoying the quality of, in my mind.
That'd be a good way to look at it. I'm going to agree with you guys as well. I'm also going to say this is a party movie. This is a movie to watch with a group of friends. I think that if you try and watch it yourself, as we said, the plot is too discordant to follow. But that's going to make it all the better when you get a couple of friends together, get some drinks, get some food, lots of food, and enjoy watching this. And then maybe it will send you in a spiral of, hey, we should make a movie. And when you do make that movie, make sure to reach out to me at natewyckoffcomedy.com and send it in, and we will take a look at it here on Cult and Classic. This has been the first episode. Thank you guys so much for supporting us. Feel free to donate so we can keep doing this. And I'm going to play you out with a great track from the Chud. Thank you so much to the Chud for giving us music. And remember, all clips and references in this show are used to review the films and are the property of those copyright holders. Thank you so much. I'm Nate Wyckoff. This has been Nate Wyckoff, Jeffrey Tucker, and Tad Mastroianni. Enjoy your day. Clips used in this podcast are for review purposes only and are the property of the appropriate owners and distributors. Music in this podcast is courtesy of The Chud at facebook.com/thechudband. If you enjoyed this podcast, please rate us on your favorite podcast platform and donate at cultandclassicpodcast.com.